So today I'm going to be going through an incredible story about a Japanese man called Hisashi Ouchi, who is known for being the most radioactive man in history. But before we get into it, if you would like to like and subscribe for more content, that would be brilliant. Hope you enjoy. So it was just a normal day for Hisashi Ouchi on the 30th of September 1999 in Tokai Village, Japan. So he was a specialised nuclear technician at the JCO nuclear fuel conversion facility, and today he was working alongside two other nuclear technicians named Yutaka Yokohawa and Masato Shinohara. So when they all met up at work in the morning, they were asked to do something a little bit more different as to what they would normally do. So today they were asked to create fuel rods for other power plants. So they made these fuel rods by converting uranium hexafluoride into uranium dioxide. Due to this being the first batch of uranium dioxide that they've made in over 3 years, they had no trained staff who were confident enough to do this job, so they had to ask any technicians which were available at the time to complete this procedure. So the approved procedure is to pour nitric acid into a dissolution tank, which the pure mixture would then be pumped into a taller storage tank called a buffer tank, and then would be slowly transferred into a wider tank called a precipitation tank, where it would be mechanically stirred. The purpose of this design was to control the flow of mixture going into the precipitation tank to avoid the mixture going critical, with the approved concentration level of uranium being 5%. However, 3 years prior to this date, the JCO company modified the approved procedure of making the uranium dioxide. So instead of pouring the mixture into the precipitation tank and it going through that whole procedure I told you about previously, instead they changed it to where you literally stir it in a stainless steel bucket and pour it straight into the dissolution tank. So this unapproved procedure was against the law and against all government regulations due to its extreme danger. So when the three workers arrived at work that day, the company were putting extreme pressure on the staff due to the company already being 2 days behind on getting these nuclear fuel rods delivered. So the company forced the staff to get all these procedures done as quick as possible to get these fuel rods sent out. So with the high pressure coming from the company, the staff had no choice but to try and cut a few corners and get this mixture ready as quick as possible. So they did this by mixing the uranyl nitrated solution in the stainless steel bucket and pouring it directly into the precipitation tank. Then instead of using the approved 5% concentration of uranium, they were using 18% concentrated uranium. So that was done to create the fuel as quick as possible. Then at roughly 10:35 AM, after 40 litres of this highly concentrated nitrate solution had been poured into the precipitation tank, eventually the radiation alarm sounded, and these three workers they reported of seeing an extremely bright blue flash. The solution was generating enough heat, it was hot enough that it started generating its own nuclear reaction, which eventually burst out gamma and neutron radiation in all directions. So at this time, Ouchi was standing literally just in front of the dissolution tank with his body pressed up against the tank. Then Shinohara was up on a platform and he was pouring the mixture directly into the dissolution tank. And then Yokohawa was sitting a few feet away, sitting at his desk. As this tank exploded, all of the radiation that was sent out of it was directly pumped straight into Ouchi's body. Shinohara got a little bit of it. Well, he still got a lot, but nowhere near as much as Ouchi did. Then Yokohawa was sitting at his desk, he received a little bit as well. The international radiation safety limit per person per year is 20 millisieverts, with the fatal dose being 5,000 millisieverts. So Yokohawa was sitting over his desk a few feet away. He received 3,000 millisieverts from this explosion. Then Yokohawa, standing up on the platform, he received 10,000 millisieverts. And then Ouchi, standing with his body pressed up against the tank, he received 18,000 millisieverts, which is 3 times more than what is considered lethal. So instantly, Ouchi and Shinohara were feeling nausea and pain, and they were both fighting for their breath. Then all three men rapidly rushed into the bathroom, and Ouchi was sick and eventually passed out. So all three men were quickly sent over to the hospital, whereas Ouchi and Shinohara were then sent over to the University of Tokyo because it had more qualified staff, more advanced technology, and the facilities were just a lot more modern. So Ouchi's nurse described him to have a reddish skin, almost like an extreme sunburn, and she said that his arms were completely swollen, and he also said that he was receiving a lot of pain in his arm. But another one of the nurses said he was really talkative, really friendly, he was really polite to the staff. He was even making a few jokes, and one of the nurses even thought that he might have been able to go home at the end of the day. But mainly that the nurses couldn't believe that he had taken such a high amount of radiation all in one go, and it was unbelievable at how he was still alive. They did a few tests on him, and once these test results come back, the nurse who previously thought that he might have been going home that day, her thoughts completely changed. So the human body is maintained by a group of different cell types which shed and replace themselves with new cells, with chromosomes instructing all of these cells to shed and replace. So completing this function of shedding and replacing the cells is completely impossible without chromosomes. So normal chromosomes can be identified quite easily, but when Ouchi's chromosome tests had come back, they were completely abnormal. So were completely reconstructed by the radiation. They were unorganised, mutated, and in some cases they're even fused together. So his DNA was literally ripped and torn apart to the point where the chromosomes couldn't instruct the cell types anymore. So his outward appearance looked pretty normal, other than the fact he had like sort of reddish skin, but it didn't look anything too severe. This is only because the cells that were replaced before he was hit with the radiation were still living. But unfortunately, these healthy cells wouldn't last for too much longer. And this is when the serious problems start occurring for Ouchi. So firstly, his white blood cells decreased rapidly to a minor 10% of what is considered healthy. This means he was highly susceptible to illnesses and infections, bacterial infections, so he had to be sent into a sterile room in order to keep any of like these outside viruses and bacteria getting into his body. So Dr. Mayakawa was in charge of the team, and his first aim was to sort out his problem of not being able to generate cells, because if he's unable to generate cells, then his body is unable to get healthier and better. So this was their main priority, to get his cells back reconstructing themselves and get the chromosomes back instructing these cells. So he decided to use an experimental method called peripheral blood stem cell transplantation, which this method had never ever been used previously. So this procedure consists of extracting stem cells by a donor and injecting them straight into Ouchi's arm. The healthy stem cells will then travel to the bone marrow, overriding any of the damaged cells, and then the new healthy ones would then allow the bone marrow to start generating new cells again. However, the donor had to be a perfect match. So with many attempts to find a suitable donor, the only suitable donor happened to be his sister. So they started the procedure instantly, but however, it would take minimum of 10 days to see whether the treatment was actually working or not. So the doctors allowed Ouchi's family to come and visit him in hospital, but this was mainly because the doctors were sort of unsure on whether he was going to survive or not. So like without telling his family that they were unsure of his survival rate, they let him see him to see his eventual decay and see his state, hopefully helping them to come to the realisation that he's probably not going to survive. So over the next few days, his skin started to deteriorate due to the skin cell stores were rapidly dying. So when his skin started to lose the elasticity, his skin was becoming really fragile and was just like falling off like in layers. And then whenever the doctors would peel off the medical tape, it would also peel off thick chunks of skin straight off his flesh. So because of that, they obviously had to stop using the medical tape. Then shortly after, he really started struggling with his breathing, so doctors considered putting him on a respirator, but they decided to leave him a little bit longer, so he had a little bit longer to talk to his wife. Then as the day dragged on, with Ouchi struggling more and more with his breathing, he managed to gather up the courage and energy and the will to produce one last sentence to his wife, which was, "I love you." Then the following day, he was completely unable to breathe and was forced to be put on the respirator. So every day his family came and visited him in hospital, and every single day they would fold a little paper crane together and they would place it next to his bedside table. But unfortunately, due to the risk of like the infection he could receive from just this piece of paper was so high that the family could not place this paper crane next to his bed. So Japanese legends suggest that if one person folds 1,000 cranes, then they will either receive a wish or they will be granted with good health for the rest of their life. So 10 days had passed since Ouchi had received the stem cells from his sister, and as the doctors collected his blood, they were all hoping to see the one thing that they were all hoping to see. They collected his sample of blood on the petri dish and they peered through the microscope, and to their success, they saw 2 little red dots, which was his sister's chromosomes living in his blood, and they were healthy and alive. This made Ouchi the first person in the world to receive this treatment, and it actually worked. So over the next few days, his white blood cell count started to increase and raise to a normal level, making him less susceptible to catching these viruses and bacterial infections that could have potentially killed him. But however, a week later, Ouchi's skin started to deteriorate at a greater speed. So an endoscope was used to view Ouchi's intestines, and this confirmed the doctor's worst fear. So the mucous membranes had drooped and turned white, and this signified that they had died. So mucous membranes are used to absorb fluids and nutrients which you consume via food and obviously drinking water, but with the mucous membranes being dead in Ouchi's intestines, his body could not absorb these nutrients and the water that he needed to survive. So they then decided to do another test on his blood, but instead of seeing what they saw before, they saw mutated cells living in his body that had been destroyed by the radiation in his body. So the radiation that he received from the blast was strong enough to kill the stem cells which were put inside his body by his sister. And shortly after that, he started to experience gastrointestinal pain and discomfort, which this caused him to release 3 litres of diarrhea every single day. So with the mucous membranes that had died in his intestines, they had peeled off, causing intense internal bleeding, so the doctors had no choice but to start blood transfusions on him. With some days, he was receiving up to 10 blood transfusions a day. So some drugs were given to him to try and relieve some of the pain, but they would not stay in his system for long enough due to the amount of fluids he was losing. So once all of his skin had eventually all peeled off, he was losing up to 10 litres of fluid every single day. So in order to try and retain what little skin he had left, the doctors were forced to wrap almost his entire body in a medical gauze in order to try and keep this skin in place and to try and hold the fluids in. But due to the amount of bleeding, he was bleeding every single day. But this didn't help because the bleeding was so extreme that the gauze would be completely drenched in blood within a few hours. So Ouchi's skin was so dry and fragile that eventually his eyelids had cracked off, which caused his eyeballs to shrink up as they got so dry, and they would bleed down profusely. And he was also offered with narcotics to try and assist him with sleep and also to try and relieve him of the pain, but the same again, they would not stay in his body for long enough due to the amount of fluids he was losing. So the only option that they had left was to try a skin graft with lab-created skin. So if this option had worked, then this would have kept in some of the fluids that Ouchi was losing, and it would have really given the doctors a little bit more time to try and save Ouchi's life. So unfortunately, due to the massive amount of fluid he was losing every single day, the skin graft would not take to his body and would just fall off, and it would have no positive effects on his body. So one doctor, he admitted that all of the other doctors were sort of unsure on whether he was going to survive, and they were all sort of like losing their hope, and like they weren't giving up, but like they feel like what they're going to do isn't really going to help. But like during the time of treating Ouchi, no one admitted it because they didn't want to lose their sights on their intentions to save his life. So 2 months have gone by since Ouchi was first admitted, and numerous attempts have been attempted to try and like sort of restore his body, restore his skin, restore his mutated chromosomes, but nothing seems to be working. So so the doctors are starting to lose their hope, and the family is starting to realise that there's a good chance that he's not going to survive. So not only was he suffering with extreme pains, also his heart was racing at a staggering 120 beats per minute, which is equivalent to running a marathon. So this rapid heart rate was caused by the amount of blood transfusions he was going through every single day, and also the amount of blood that he was losing every single day. So the amount of stress being put on his cardiac muscle was getting more and more and more by the second, and eventually his heart stopped. They did manage to get his heart back working again, but instantly it stopped again. So they administered cardiotonic drugs straight into his system. Then after 3 more attempts, they eventually did manage to get his heart back working again, but it was at a fast but steady pace. So with the stopping and starting of the heart, it caused severe problems with his brain. So whenever his family or the doctors tried talking to him, normally like he wasn't like able to talk, but he was able to give some sort of response, whether it would be a head nod or a thumbs up or anything. But now he was completely unable to give any single response to anyone, with his whole life now completely dependent on the medical equipment. Then Ouchi's immune cells were now starting to become abnormal, and they started attacking the very few white blood cells he had left in his body, and eventually he was left with 0 white blood cells. This means if he was to catch a common cold, he would be dead in an hour. So on the 81st day of Ouchi being admitted to the hospital, Dr. Mayakawa gathered up his family and he basically had to sort of break the news to them and say, look, so if his heart was to stop again, they should not try to resuscitate. And he did manage to convince the family to sign a do not resuscitate agreement. Then on the 83rd day, his wife and son visited him for the last time, and the doctors uncovered the gauze on his face to say a proper goodbye to him, because they knew that this was going to be the last time. Shortly after, on the 83rd day of his relentless, brutal battle for life, his heart was slowing and slowing down and becoming a very slow, gradual beat. Then eventually it had stopped. Ouchi had now officially passed away. So some people believe that the doctors were using Ouchi as like a sort of experiment because they had never really come across this sort of patient to treat before. So a lot of people speculated that the doctors were doing this out of, like, it wasn't, like, he wasn't agreeing to it and his family wasn't agreeing to it. But however, it's like the opposite. His family agreed to do all this. His family wanted the doctors to put in as much effort in to save him as possible because they wanted him to live. So all of this treatment was done out of his family's acceptance. So that's going to be it for today's video then. If you did enjoy, please make sure you like and subscribe, because it really does help. And if you've got any more ideas on what video I should do next, whether it be a similar sort of topic where there's another person with some fascinating story like this, or whether it be something completely different, just put it in the comments. But yeah, that's going to be it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.